Throughout the history of the United States, laborers and workers have been harshly treated and taken advantage of. From slave owners to enforcing an oppressive and brutal system throughout half the country, to Chinese immigrants being killed in the hundreds to construct the Transcontinental Railroad, people performing the perceived lowliest jobs in the country enjoyed no protection from being exploited. This was also the reality for millions of farm workers throughout the southwestern United States, starting from the Great Depression and extending long into the 20th century. For years, agricultural laborers were abused, given terrible wages, and preyed upon by landowners and companies, who also prevented them from unionizing or getting any form of representation. This was especially true for immigrant laborers, who were particularly vulnerable simply because their labor was easily replaced and demand for work was so high. However, this all changed because of one man, Cesar Chavez. Working against the deep-rooted agricultural practices of the industry, Cesar Chavez decided to take a stand. Chavez led a new movement of strikes and boycotts which set him up as an outlaw to the establishment agriculture industry. Working tirelessly for years, he faced arrest, discrimination, backlash, and more, yet remained faithful and unwavering to his cause of achieving worker protection. Because of his staunch opposition to the establishment, which was anti-union laws at the time, Chavez asserted himself as an outlaw. However, he used this status for the good of others by securing key rights for farm laborers across the country. Cesar Chavez was born on March 31, 1927, in Yuma, Arizona. His family once owned a farm, but because of the Depression, his family was forced to move, becoming migrant workers and moving to California. Here, Chavez witnessed the terrible conditions of migrant workers firsthand. The wages were terrible, and they lived in squalor. According to an article by NPR, for 2 hours of work at the time, the Chavez family earned 20 cents. They moved from place to place, following the harvests. Growing up as a migrant worker undoubtedly shaped how Chavez perceived the agriculture industry, and this is most likely what pushed him to become a labor rights activist. In 1952, Chavez started his journey as an activist when he began working for the Community Service Organization, a Latino civil rights group. He helped with issues like voter registration, immigration, and police abuse, and he even rose to become its national director. However, Chavez wished to focus his activism on farm workers' rights. In 1962, he proposed the Farm Workers Union to the CSO, but they rejected it. So he resigned and formed the National Farm Workers Association himself. After spending a few years traveling between Arizona and California recruiting members, the NFWA and Chavez was ready for their first action, taking on grape growers. In September of 1965, Chavez called for a strike against grape growers to secure workers' rights. In 1966, action continued, as Chavez led a 340-mile march from Delano, California, to Sacramento. 1966 was also the year Chavez was arrested and charged with trespassing on a farm in Borrego Springs. According to a San Diego Times article published following the arrest, Chavez, along with 2 priests and 10 others, entered the property to retrieve personal items of workers who had gone on strike at Chavez's urging. A security guard who had found them made a citizen's arrest and gave him to the sheriff. Chavez's arrest is an important moment in his career as it shows the extent to which he had been an enemy in the established agriculture industry. This unrest undoubtedly solidifies Chavez as an outlaw. Chavez went on to continue his efforts after his arrest, not letting it deter him. In 1967, he called for a nationwide boycott against grapes that were non-union, and in 1968 he fasted for 25 days to reiterate his support for action against the grape growers. Each of these actions throughout Chavez's life opposed the established agriculture companies. By encouraging strikes, boycotts, and more, he posed himself as an agent of opposition to their harsh practices. In doing so, from the perspective of the landowners, Chavez was undoubtedly an outlaw who roamed around disrupting their operations. Eventually, Chavez saw tremendous success, first in 1970 and later in 1975. In 1970, the strikes and boycotts against the grape growers were successful in pressuring landowners to negotiate. What followed was a comprehensive agreement which established several rights for workers in the industry, including the right to unionize and the right to collective bargaining to gain better wages. This was a critical victory for Chavez and was the culmination of almost 10 years of work. Henceforth, workers in the grape farming industry would no longer be taken advantage of like they previously had been. Furthermore, in 1975, Chavez's action directly led to California passing landmark legislation known as the Agricultural Labor Relations Act. This act enshrined the right for all agricultural workers in California to unionize and establish collective bargaining agreements for wages and better working conditions. Based on his actions taken against the farming industry and his arrest, it is undeniable that Cesar Chavez was an outlaw. By working against the practices of agricultural labor that had been law for decades, he established himself as an outsider, looking to rework these common practices. By protesting, boycotting, and striking, Chavez was able to accomplish great successes for his cause. To obtain not only concessions from the companies that were using the oppressive labor practices, but also legal support in the form of California's Agricultural Labor Relations Act, is astonishing, and speaks to just how effective of an activist Chavez was. Going forward, Chavez would continue to work until his eventual death. He used his status as an outlaw to give himself even more credibility as an activist, as he was not just a spokesperson, but actively striking and boycotting right along with the workers. Cesar Chavez's positive impact on society is undeniable. His victories for the agricultural labor movement are everlasting and continue to benefit people to this day. Even now, according to the United Farm Workers website, which is the organization that merged from the NWFA in 1966, Chavez's vision lives on to this day, fighting for equal rights and protections against modern problems like child pesticide exposure. Thanks to Cesar Chavez, millions of workers throughout the United States no longer worry about the mistreatment of almost a century ago.